Good morning, everyone. We'll call the meeting to order. We respectfully acknowledge that the Township of Algonquin Highlands is located on Treaty 20 Mishi-Saugig territory and in the traditional territory of the Mishi-Saugig and Chippewa Nations, collectively known as the Williams Treaties First Nations. We also acknowledge the historical shared presence of other Indigenous nations throughout the area, and we recognize these original inhabitants as the stewards of its lands and waters since time immemorial. Could I have a mover and a seconder to adopt the agenda? Councillor Shortreed, Deputy Mayor Dayu.
Moved by Councillor Shortreed, seconded by Deputy Mayor Dayu. Be it resolved that the January 29th, 2026 special meeting agenda be approved as circulated.
All in favor? That's carried. For those who may be tuning in to listen to our meeting today, I just wanted to remind everyone that what we're working on when we talk about a parking philosophy is something that is for the entire township. And while we have identified the Big Hawk Lake Road as one of the primary issues to be dealt with, we haven't yet made any decisions. We're in the middle of discussions on this philosophy. We appreciate the input that we've received from a lot of you, and we will be talking about how we can seek further input from the public. But in the meantime, we haven't landed on anything specific yet, so stay tuned. Is there any declaration of pecuniary interest or general nature thereof today? Hearing none, we'll move into our primary reason for being here today. And that is the parking philosophy. And we will welcome Stuart Anderson and Michael Gianardo from the BA Group. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. Thank you. Sorry, that took a few seconds to get in the virtual room. Forgive
That's
the
all right.
awkward pause.
And likewise,
yeah,
good morning, Councillor and Mayor.
So over to you to give us the highlights of your report.
All right. So we have a presentation. Not sure if it's up yet in your room.
Yes, it's up.
It's up. Okay. Okay. I can see it now too. Perfect. So just wanted to, say, first of all, thanks for having us back here again. It was December 11 where we met with you and had I think a very good discussion about the issues on parking in the township. We're back today. I'll just, if you could flip to the next slide, please. Back today to just report back on the best practices review that we've done so far. And then just wanted to say at the outset, there's one more key step to come in this project, which is the after today's meeting and discussion, we will go away and work on, with the direction of Mayor and Council, go away and work on the recommendations for the study based on what the discussion is today with selected best practices that the town wishes to look in further detail at. So today I just wanted to have a quick review on where we're at in the project, a little bit of recap on December 11. It's not that long ago, but just to go through some of the key points that at least that were key for us, and wanted to make sure they are key for you as well. So just, I think the next slide, please. I think we'll get through the beginning fairly quickly because again, it was only December. I assume everyone can remember it at least as well as I can, which is hopefully good enough to carry on with the discussion today. So the intent of the overall study, just wanted to recap that. We're looking at a strategic level review of parking, and as the mayor said at the outset, it's intended to be for the entire township and not one specific location. So trying to take everything into account as we go forward. And I think these were the big picture questions as far as we are concerned at VA Group, and I think these were what we heard from from staff and from mayor and council at the last meeting as well, which is the sort of obvious big picture questions as I've got on the screen here. So how should parking be treated? What kinds of tools and solutions could be used? And really within that sentence, it's also what is appropriate for the township of Algonquin Highlands, given that some solutions and some methods used by other municipalities just simply may not be the right tool for the job here. And then the last piece is, where's the responsibility? Where should it lie? In terms of, is the municipality doing everything to do with parking, or are there other partners involved in the solutions for the parking issues? And that means sort of developers or landowners or whoever it might be, but not just the city. Sorry, not just the township. To the next slide, please. So again, recap on what we heard and what we've learned from meeting with city staff, with township staff previously. There seem to be some key issues that keep coming up, and one is the subdivision of existing properties, in particular subdivision and increased use of water access only properties. I've put cottages there, but I guess it could be any properties at all. The other thing that is happening that we've heard about is increased seasonal activities, by which I mean so canoeing and hiking in the summer, tourist type activities, and then the ice fishing, snowmobiling, all that good winter stuff, snowshoeing in the winter. So tied in with all of that, I guess, is the last point there on the slide is an increase in tourism, and also issues that may arise from short-term rentals, and that's been a key issue, I think, for a lot of municipalities, and maybe especially sort of small ones in cottage country and other parts of Ontario, where there are some impacts that municipalities have been addressing already through bylaws, but whether there's anything else that could be done for parking solutions too. So just to recap, to the next slide, again, just sort of trying to list all the things we heard in a little bit more detail. I've touched on some of them already, but I think for the water access, there were a number of things that I recalled coming up after our conversation, and it's not just the residents and visitors, but there's other things with construction activities, maintenance activities, and making sure that docks and boat launch areas are available for use in some way for the kind of general maintenance as well as building. And we definitely heard that there's unique issues on every lake and different levels of development on those lakes. The trailer and boat parking one, again, is one that's common to other municipalities, and we'll get into in the best practices how some others have addressed that. And so not to recover the sightseeing and day tripping and tourism, but again, that's something that's coming up elsewhere. And a key thing we heard also, again, from public works staff in particular, but also from councillors, is the issue of any parking that might be taking place on the roadway itself, and whether or not that's an issue for either maintenance access for snowplows or emergency access for emergency vehicles. So something to keep an eye on when it's when parking in the municipal right-of-way is concerned. So again, with saying there's unique issues for every lake, another key issue we heard is the direction to be fair and equitable to all areas of the municipality and all residents. So it's not just one solution for one particular area or user group. So as we've gone through, and the last 3 points I think here are key things that we've tried to look at in the best practices review. We'll summarize shortly. So consistency is a big thing that you don't want to be doing something entirely different from the neighbor across to the west, and say the township of Lake of Bays or other townships to the east and north. And with small municipalities, the ability to pay is something we heard about definitely at the December 11 meeting, and something we want to keep in mind as we go through. So whatever solutions are investigated and are recommended will have to be able to be supported in some way, not just from the capital and operational side, but especially on the operational side with enforcement and how you deal with enforcement of rules issues on such a, frankly quite a large municipality with some areas that are wide ranging from perhaps considering the where city hall where the township offices are. Okay. I just wanted to pause for a minute, one to drink a mouthful of coffee, but also just to make sure that as I've summarized stuff here, if there's anything that mayor, council, and staff can recall in those discussions from December 11 that is missing here, and any other key points or directions you wanted to emphasize at this point based on our discussion last time around.
I think for the most part, you've covered the, most of the issues that we raised. The only one comment that I would make at this point in time is the issue of short-term rentals and how that's increased, some of the issues related to parking. However, it's my understanding that the legislation that we passed with respect to short-term rentals requires them to provide parking for their clients, not for us to provide the parking. And that's all that stands out for me right now. But I'd ask council if there's any questions or concerns, something that we've left out, or Councillor Richards.
Just on that, I think on the water access only properties for short-term rentals, it's my understanding that they can use municipal parking as parking for their solution to parking.
Well, I think we need to double check that. That is not my understanding. Not when it comes to short-term rentals.
Yes, Mayor, we can check that. I don't know that off the top of my head.
Any other questions or comments or concerns at this point in time? The one thing that I would like to say, for everyone's information, I would like us all to have a discussion about input from taxpayers and how we might go about doing that. We've received a lot of input from the Halls Hawk area, but I'd like us to provide an opportunity for all ratepayers to sort of chime in and give us their concerns or comments. So we'll need to talk about the best process to do that at some point during this session today. If there's nothing else, can carry on.
Okay, thank you. And just in response to the short-term rental, that's my understanding from the bylaw that the township has passed as well, is that you do have to demonstrate where the parking is in order for the licensing to be approved, or it's required in the application. I put it that way. So yes, that it is addressed in some way. Sorry, if we can move on to the next
Maybe
slide.
If we could just to continue on with the question about short-term rentals, I believe our planner, Sean O'Callaghan, might be able to shed some light on that.
Thank you. Good
Sean?
morning, Mayor and Council. Yes, so with water access properties, we do accept a parking plan that shows municipal parking as being the parking spaces for that particular property.
So just for water access only properties.
Correct.
Okay. Thanks for that, Councillor Richards. Councillor Barry?
So just a question with that, if you have a large cottage or a large short-term rental on water that could sleep 8 people, 10 people, how many parking spots would that consist of?
So the short-term rental bylaw does require one parking space per bedroom, which can accommodate two people. So they would need to provide confirmation of four spaces being available for that particular property in this case.
Any other questions for Sean? Thanks, Sean.
Thank you.
Okay, carry on with the priorities for the study.
Yes, thank you. So we touched on this at the December 11th meeting. So just looking to, I guess, confirm what we had discussed last time and go through those priorities that we heard about. If we can go to the next slide, I've just listed what I recalled based on the meeting on December 11th. So I think on the left side of the screen is are 5 bullet points that we think are the key things here that will help identify a direction once we settle on some areas to go forward with. So I think there was a discussion about how to set the priorities and whether it be by geography or by type of issue or other possible ways of looking at it. I think what I heard was looking at priorities by the scale of the issue was a key, and not just the location of the issue. So whether it's and by scale or issue, and part of that is what I touched on previously, and that's and reflected in the next bullet point as well, which is to do with risk and safety issues. So are there any outcomes that might come out of that parking issue that would affect safety in terms of emergency vehicle access or other types of risk that the municipality might be drawn into, but also just general public safety as well. We've touched on it already, but the consideration of funding limitations is a key consideration, I think, here. We talked briefly about what I've called here quick wins, that is things that can be done relatively easily in terms of implementation and funding and speed as well, or things that the township has full control over. I think those are things that should be, to my mind, higher on the priority. So you're not relying necessarily on, for example, the Ministry of the provincial government to do with land acquisition or things like that might take some time and other potential implications, but things that might be within the control already of the township of Algonquin Highlands. The last one there is, I think, what Mayor had touched on earlier. So how public preferences are considered in this as well, in that whatever solutions, and this sounds obvious, but whatever solutions are drawn from this study are going to impact all the residents of the township, and they should, as the mayor had pointed out, should be gauged as to what the public opinion is, and things that are acceptable or unacceptable, and ways around that. So public preference should be a key part of that as well. So again, I've touched on some of these things already, but the box on the right side is sort of, as we go through these things, are things we want to keep an eye on, and it's precedents. It's what neighboring municipalities are doing. The key issue of equity and fairness across the municipality, and the consistency and responsibility as well. So again, who is in control of making the decisions and implementing the recommendations, noting that there may be some issues that just simply must involve more than just the township. Okay, so with
two comments with respect to this particular page. one of the things that has come up in some of the emails that we've received to date is that, this is a cash grab. This is the municipality looking to create a revenue generating stream. And I want to make it clear that what, the only thing that we're considering is cost recovery, depending on the direction that we decide to go. And one other thing that we do need to consider, when we're looking at priorities, is that we also have an asset management plan that identifies, which dock or landing is a priority for needing repairs, and how we might proceed with that process with respect to surveys, of the area, acquisition of land from the Crown to go along with that project. So that would be part of the decision-making process as well. Just at this point, any other comments by council about about the priorities? Okay, carry on, Stuart.
Thank you. Okay, so just stepping then into the best practices. So we're going to step into the scope of what we looked at first, and we were trying to identify things that other municipalities have done, and again a focus on trying to identify municipalities with similar types of issues, as well as similar size. So water being a key one, lakes, rivers, etc., marinas, that kind of thing are an important component of what's happening in the township. And then looking at any possible solutions, practices that those municipalities use. And again, key things here are how, if there are permits, how they are used, what the enforcement is like, whether there's sort of evidence of those municipalities owning a supply of parking and managing it, or how that's managed either privately or otherwise. And looking also at the zoning land use controls and other potential sources of revenue for parking and other things. So those are the first parts of what we're looking at. So just to the next slide. I think, again, when we look at the solutions that, or the best practices that others have used, the key ones I've talked about already. So similar jurisdictions, the presence of cottage associations, private ownership, how those might exist in the other municipalities, and how things are funded, how things are enforced. So just those are the things that we were thinking of as we went through. The next slide shows the key municipalities that we've reviewed. I mean, most of them we tried to be as local as possible. There's some that are you can see on the list that are not immediately local, and we picked on them because of particular things that they were doing with regard to boat trailer parking and boat access cottages. So the ones that are a little further afield, like Northern Bruce Peninsula, so it's around Tobermory. I know that one came up in a previous meeting or previous discussions. City of Aurelia, again, it's not really on the same comparable in terms of size and kind of urban development, but it's there because of, again, certain things they're doing with permits for boat launch activities. But I think the rest of them are mostly comparable, certainly in the geographic area of Muskokas and Kawarthas and Algonquins, and they're all kind of in the general area. Okay, so the next slide then. So we looked through what we thought based on what the priorities were, what the issues that we heard on December 11 were. And so these are the key things that we've looked at for each of those different municipalities. I think there was 15 on the list. So for each of those 15, we've looked at these 6 particular things, whether or not there are user fees for parking of any sort, or parking for boat launches in particular, whether or not there's sort of a different fee structure for residents versus visitors. That's something we'd heard about and touched on last time as well. how the short-term rentals are dealt with, since it appears to be a big issue for many municipalities, and just some of the policies that can be put in place through zoning or official plan within the municipality that address parking. Some quick looks into supply and management of parking with partnerships, basically other people or other organizations other than the municipality, and lastly looking at enforcement as well, and how it might be managed in terms of parking, but also just the general sort of snow rules, overnight rules, that kind of thing, about on-street parking and off-street parking as well. So those are the key ones we've looked at.
Any
Just,
comments or other things that council think need to be considered at this point in time? And I should ask as well if staff, if there's any comments that any of you've got at this stage that we may have missed or that we think should be considered. Councillor Barry.
Just one thing that came up in several of the emails that we received was, if there's any consideration on accessibility. You know, you increase more parking, but it's further away, then they have an accessibility issue. And then I just wanted to know, I mean, we're not into the funding yet, but I just wanted to know how the mat tax could be considered as part of this project going forward. I know that's a little early question, but
But it is something that, can factor into, where we land with this.
Yeah.
And like, as you say, it's a bit early, but still, it's
Yeah.
definitely something to consider. Deputy Mayor Dayu?
Yeah, thanks. Great presentation so far. I think you've really clearly outlined what we talked about in our last meeting. The one piece that I would add to the list of best practices on this page that is important for me, and I suspect you'll touch into it when you tell us more about these other townships you've looked into, is not just user fees, boat launches, different fees for residents and visitors, but also different type of use. So, is there a township out there that will charge for leaving a trailer by the roadside, or in the wintertime, a trailer for snowmobiles, that sort of thing? So it's what you're doing with the space rather than who is in the space or where the space is.
Yeah, thank you for that. Mr. Card?
Thank you. Yes. When thinking about study areas, I'd like to add the consideration of understanding what our current supply is relative to demand at all of our locations. We don't know exactly what the demand is as far as if we were to want to target a certain amount of parking at any of our landings. So that is to say, getting an understanding of how many parking spaces do we actually need, and defining what that means, as in who do we want to provide that parking to. So if we're talking about adding supply in certain areas at the landings, what are we targeting for that addition of supply? Is it only water access, only cottages? Is it water access only to a certain number per place, as well as a number of how many trailers would be possible? We don't have that information, and we haven't set those targets. And then also looking at our current bylaw about storage at landings, and the what we're seeing at them relative to what's our bylaw says. And the example is when people are storing their boats on shorelines. And as we know, the challenge is we don't know in all instances what our boundaries are on those shorelines. And therefore not able to enforce accurately or adequately if people are storing their boats. But presently, the way our current bylaw is written, there's boats stored on shorelines at numerous landings in contravention of the existing bylaw. So looking at that relationship.
Thanks. I really appreciate that, and I know that each one of the landing areas will likely differ I mean, we don't even have sufficient land that is ours to control for unloading and loading boats. Never mind, what we want to provide for parking and whether it's on a short-term basis or long-term. I guess that there's the question then comes to me, like, how are we going to arrive at that information? Are our staff going to do it? Will this be part of the work that our consultants are doing? And I'm also very concerned about the issue of enforcement. Because I mean, we've got a huge geographic area. We could, personally, I'd like us to try and keep it as simple as possible when it comes to enforcement. Or the next thing you know, we'll be having to add to our bylaw departments, and that's going to be a challenge for us. Councillor Barry?
Just in sort of addition to what Chris has said, not just what our current issue is, but a projection of how the population is growing and how that is going to impact over the next 10 years. I think that's an important factor as well.
Councillor Richards?
My other pretty big concern is regarding land that is not ours, so Crown land, even private land in some cases. People get creative and start parking in places where we can't enforce them not to park, including on beaches or storing boats in the woods, that kind of thing. Easily they can, wheel a trailer into the woods. If we start limiting options too much or not providing enough supply, how do we deal with that before that gets out of hand?
Thank you. Any other comments from council at this point? Okay, carry on.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, that was a good, helpful conversation for me. A couple of things that got raised there. I just wanted to touch on just as far as sort of parking study 101 goes. Almost every study we've ever done at BA Group and others as well. Some key things are having a good understanding of what the supply and the demand is, and then also some kind of estimates of what the future demands are, either through sort of tracking census data and population projections, and as well as directions from the province and that kind of thing. So those things typically would be done. I guess what I'm saying here today, there was a decision made early on to do before we got into that level of detail, to do a high level thing of I guess what's been termed the parking philosophy of, so what's generally the approach that should be taken. So I would definitely echo and support the idea that going forward, to have a really good understanding of what the problems are, and how large the sledgehammer needs to be to crack the nut, etc. Then there be that kind of understanding of existing supply, demands, issues, and have all that data in front of the municipality to make those decisions, as well as what those expectations are for the future. So we're sitting here today, I guess, in absence of that type of information, thinking forward about potential solutions. But I, yes, 100% echo that those should be grounded in something as this moves forward. Just wanted to step forward then into the first slide on the best practices. I think Mike and my colleague Michael and I will kind of chime in, both of us, on these ones. We've sort of divided up the list and went through them as kind of a tag team thing. So I'll know some things better about some municipalities than others, and so Mike will chime in as we go through. But so user fees was a key one we've looked at, and so that's the basic question of, does this municipality that we're looking at have any user fees for parking at all, anywhere? And that's the key thing we've we've looked at. Just some of the ones I've noticed going through sort of my part of the list. There's been a few, and it's not uncommon. It's not reserved to cottage country, but there's been, especially post-COVID, I think there's been a number of municipalities across Ontario that have moved away from meters and charging user fees, and have gone to more of the time limit type of thing. And there's implications on both sides of that. So I think Halliburton, that one removed meters it was 2020-ish, 2022. I think both Midland, Township of Midland, and Halliburton and the Dysart et al. Municipality had gone that way. Generally, I would say most of the peer municipalities for the Township of Algonquin Highlands do not have metered paid parking in general locations. There's a few that do, but I would say the majority by far is that they don't. There's a very, one of the smaller ones, the McNabb Braeside towards the east, towards Ottawa. There, they do have paid parking at boat launch facilities and at park facilities, and that's done by way of not a physical meter, but having, I think it's through the not to promote anyone. It's one of the technology suppliers that does you basically scan a QR code with your phone and pay that way, or have an account with them. So that's how that one's done. Michael, I wanted to just get your thoughts on the key ones you've looked at.
Yeah, generally speaking, one of the things that we picked up is the bigger the municipality, the more common it was to charge for parking, essentially. So on, Stuart referred to our halves of the list. Innisfil, there was some charging for parking, but and I don't want to skip ahead to the next slide too soon, but one of the things that emerged, especially in places like that, was a difference in the way parking is treated for residents versus non-residents, so visitors, cottage visitors, and people like that. In some cases, it's free for residents, and in some cases, it's a charge for parking for non-residents and visitors. Tobermory was an interesting one. They have time limits on parking. So Tobermory would be North Bruce Peninsula, sorry, third from the bottom. And they charge different amounts of parking based off of the time of day and the amount of time. So whether it's 3 hours, whether it's day-long parking, that type of thing. Kawartha Lakes was an interesting one. Again, that's a city, so slightly larger. $5 daily fee, a $20 weekly fee. They go up to monthly, yearly. They have contractors permits, $15 per day per space, things like that. And then another thing too that we picked up, and I think it's probably the very first bullet point on this slide, is places that have old kind of downtowns or town centers, which Algonquin Highlands doesn't quite have in the same way as a place like Huntsville, for example. You'll see a lot of rules around parking in those types of areas, but then not otherwise in the municipality. So there's a kind of a bit of a distinction there when you have a kind of a downtown or a town center area. Mm-hmm. Just looking through our list here, whether there's other things.
If I might ask, how
Sure.
do these places determine or find out who's a resident and who's a not resident? Like, what method of proof do they have?
I can just speak from the ones that I looked at. Parking permits that you have to hang in your vehicle. So residents will go to town hall or wherever the case may be, or get it online, and they'll get a free parking permit, and they just hang it on the dash or something like that. But it's usually something that they have to display that they can park for free. I don't know, Stuart, if you saw other methods.
No, I think that's the most common one I saw. It's probably a good segue to hit the next slide, which is sort of like the subset of user fees. So this is what we've alluded to earlier, that there are some, quite a a healthy number that have gone down the road of having a different set of fees for residents and for visitors. So that's sort of exactly what we're been talking about a minute ago. So yeah, some of the ones I looked at, and we've got some ideas of general costs. So there's some that are free for residents. There's some where the residents pay a fee, but it's less than what the visitors pay, and there's some nuances on that too. So there's sort of a range of others, and then there's some of the list of the 15 we looked at. You can see this list is not quite 15 here. There's others that have no user fees whatsoever. So this is sort of a subset, like half-ish of the list of 15 that we've looked at. Don't have any user fees at all for any type of parking. But it seems to be, I guess, with the exception of Aurelia, that's a bit more built up, I would say, in terms of urban development. Most of the others on this list seem to be the smaller municipalities, and they're probably dealing with some of the similar issues, I would imagine, as the Township of Algonquin Highlands, in terms of it's a small-ish number of permanent residents, and dealing with people coming in for water access cottages, amongst other things, or for other tourism-based things, where there is that long-term demand for boat trailer parking, I think, as being the big one. Once someone's put the boat in the water and gone off for a week or two, whether it be into Georgian Bay or whether it be into some small lake somewhere. So yeah, it was interesting to see how I'd before doing this study, I'd heard of this before in certain places, but it almost surprised me a little bit how common it was in some of these similar municipalities to the size of Algonquin Highlands. So some things too is it's just the little bullet points on the bottom. It's there's impacts with everything, of course, but there are some key things on doing this, and one is the availability of municipal lots, I think, has some kind of impact on whether or not this is done. So for instance, in Aurelia, and Michael, I'll ask you to chime in a minute, but there's places like Aurelia have done this in certain of their lots and municipal lots, and said, okay, this one is a place, and I think that's a comment that came up earlier about are there certain places that accommodate boat trailer parking? So yes, within this list, there are some where they've designated specific municipal lots where you can park a boat trailer with a permit, and other ones where you can't. So obviously, if you don't have large municipal facilities, then that may be an issue with doing this, especially if you don't want people parking on the road right of way and potentially blocking emergency vehicles. So that's sort of part of that consideration too. But the other two points to touch on in the bottom three bullets is clearly if you're trying to encourage tourism or not stand in the way of it, there may be some implications here about how that plays out, notwithstanding the fact that other municipalities have gone this route. I think it requires at least some consideration at the municipal level as to priorities and whether you're having unintended impacts. The last one, I think this is important for any type of paid parking, whether it be boat trailer permits or anything else. The fees collected, and I think Madam Mayor, you touched on it earlier, is the purpose for the fees collected and whether or not you're to use that word, tax grabbing or other things that often come up in this conversation. So either you're targeting something in terms of a cost recovery, so you're dealing with staff time, maintenance, permit costs, et cetera, on a cost recovery basis, or if you're collecting fees, at least identifying where that's going. And in a lot of successful cases, it's being any revenue collected might be being put toward an improvement in a particular area, or dealt with in downtown situations. It's common that there are like the Business Improvement Association or Business Improvement Area is involved with setting priorities for how any surplus revenue may be spent. So it could be on streetscaping or in that downtown context. So there's that sort of can give in those situations a purpose and a kind of a rationalization for any type of fees that are put into something else. It sort of lets people get behind it a bit more rather than just saying, oh, it's going into some kind of slush fund that I have no idea where this money's going. So that's something that I think is important in any discussion of paid parking. Michael, I wondered if you've got a few other insights from the ones on your part of the list in terms of that visitor / resident distinction.
Yeah, I was going to just I was going to comment on the availability of the municipal parking lots, the first bullet point at the bottom there. There was a noticeable pattern with slightly larger municipalities. So Huntsville, Gravenhurst, and Bracebridge all more or less do the same thing. They do not charge for parking. They have lots of available municipal parking, and they have on-street signage limiting to a 3-hour time maximum as a way for vehicles to turn over so people don't leave their cars there. So they'll get ticketed if they don't move their vehicle within 3 hours, but it's free. So I suppose the way they collect their revenue in that case would be catching people who leave their vehicles for too long or overnight or whatever the case may be. But it was quite a noticeable pattern between those three municipalities, each of which are slightly larger, have kind of town centers, downtowns, places like that. Lots of available municipal parking that is free to use, but time limited.
And of course, when you get into issues like time limits, we're looking again at enforcement
Yes.
and how we're going to deal with that. And I also, council may have a different opinion about this, but I'm not thinking in my thoughts are not geared towards revenue generation. It's more cost recovery. But it's interesting that you would mention certain improvements that may be of interest to taxpayers, and recovering a certain amount of money that might look at that sort of thing. But I guess I'd look to council to hear their thoughts on that. We'll go to Deputy Mayor Dayu and then Councillor Richards.
Yeah, thanks. And I think given the kind of numbers that staff have already presented to us over the last few years with regards to what creating a parking lot would look like, how much it would cost, there ain't no way we're talking about revenue generation. It will be decades before the cost recovery of a couple of dollars here, a couple of dollars there, ever makes up for the cost output of creating the lot. So I think the whole cash grab thing can be thoroughly put to bed, given the knowledge of how much this is going to cost, no matter what we choose to do. But I did very much appreciate the conversation on cash grab versus cost recovery, and the need or the opportunity to identify where I'll call them revenues, that's what they are, where those revenues go, because it does set us up for a very publicly visible graduated system wherein, for example, say we want to charge a fee for trailers that are, and I'll use the Hawks for the minute. Say we wanted to charge a fee for trailers that are left on the roadside. All of that money is going towards the creation of, and I'm pulling it out of the air here, a trailer lot, which we put it together, 5 years from now. And when a trailer lot is created, then our bylaws change and trailers must go into the paid trailer lot. But until then, the payment for keeping trailers at the roadside is helping to generate the income we need in order to develop that lot. So everything that's been described so far, for me, helps to think through what such a graduated system could look like.
Thank you. Councillor Richards.
Uh, on the fees, my thoughts are is how are those fees developed? So, you know, what says the fee should be $50 or $200? Is that per month, per year, like for the season? Like, what is the mathematical mechanism used to determine what fees should be for development of parking in any area?
Stuart, I can just offer very quickly the fees that are on the page for South Bruce Peninsula and then McNabb Braeside are what they refer to as seasons pass. So it covers the date here I have for South Bruce Peninsula specifically is June 1st to Labor Day. So it's a couple of months.
Yeah, and it's conjecture for me at this point as to how they set that. What I would suggest
Well, that would be
is
my
that-
question. How is that amount arrived at? Like, what calculations do you do to determine whether it should be? I mean, I see the difference between residents and non-residents, but what determines that they're going to pay $50 as opposed to $25 or $100?
Yeah, conjecture for me at this point, I would say I don't know the answer to exactly how they set it. To me, it's just the level of differentiation between the two user groups is that my thought is that they're just trying to encourage some kind of behavior, different behavior between residents and non-residents, in terms of where they park and how they park. And you're right, the discussion on revenues, if these are like Michael said, that I found the same thing as season pass or annual pass, depending on where you were. There's no way this is funding anything, I would say. It's more, again, just trying to get the behavior in a certain place where you want to get your boat trailers in a certain lot or in a certain location, and this is sort of how you manage it, and directing that kind of behavior. But I think if you were to try to do a calculation based on the cost of like a cost recovery, I'd hesitate that even $50 would cover the cost recovery in terms of issuing permits and staff time and everything else. It seems for a season-wide type of operation, especially if you consider enforcement on top of that as well. I'm guessing at this point, but I don't think that would be enough for recovering the full costs. I think it's just sort of trying to nudge people in a certain direction of behavior.
I would also add these prices can be elastic. Like one season it could be the 50 and the 200, and the 200 had a very negative effect on tourism. Nobody was coming around anymore. So the next season it might be 100. It could be on the demand side as well, how these prices are impacting what type of activity you get. It might be too much, or it might have no impact at all, and you realize you can raise it in the next season. You can react to the impacts of the parking pricing that way.
Councillor Shortreed.
Just curious, in all the townships, towns, whatever, that are charging for paid parking, is it working? Is it working, or is it causing issues with other parking lots being overfull, and these paid parking are just taking the actual overflow because people don't have a choice?
You
Yeah,
can hear your
I-
wheels turning.
Yeah. I think if we want to go forward into this as an idea to look further into, I think we'd want to have some conversations with the enforcement people at these locations and try to answer that question properly with getting their input from those municipalities. But again, I think at least the ones I looked at were looking at trying to identify a particular location for boat trailer parking, and in some cases, there's also this can also apply to snowmobile trailer parking. Again, there's some places that are identified specific locations for that as well, and trying to guide that behavior. So I think to answer the question of whether or not that's working or whether there's other offsite implications that we're not seeing on this slide and on this table, I think we'd want to have some phone calls with enforcement people within those municipalities to answer that.
Any other comments or questions at this point in time? Councillor Barry?
Good question, but I do think, and they have considered the impact on tourism. I know for myself, I took a family to Tobermory, and it seemed like everywhere you went, you had to pay for parking. And it wasn't an easy process. You had to like download an app, create a password, pay online, pay with a Visa. And I'm just seeing it really deterred me to wanting to go back to Tobermory, to be honest, just with the aggravation of it. When I was a kid, I used to go there and everything was free. And it seemed like even down little side roads, you'd go and you'd get towards the Bruce Peninsula and there'd just be that parking sign. And I'm sure they have impacts too of people parking on private land and crown land and that type of thing. But I do think there is an impact on tourism by overcharging for things.
Or overcomplicating.
For complicating it, for sure.
Deputy Mayor Dayu?
Yeah, I fully understand that. I do think that sometimes change has impacts that we can't avoid. And parking is one of those times when, there may have to be changes that we just have to get done in order to do the job we need to do. However, I do note and recall from a number of the emails that we've been receiving over the last few weeks that people have specified their desire to not see the culture, the local culture of the area change. It's meaningful for them. Even scrambling for parking and not knowing exactly where they're going to be, and not having a meter and not having all of the trappings of modernity there, and the structure. People have expressed value on that culture. And I don't know if we're going to be able to keep it or not. I'm a bit cynical on that front. We'll see how we land. But I do want to note that culture was valued in the emails that we received so far.
Thank you. Any comments from staff? Mr. Thorne?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So as I sit here and listen to the discussion about parking and paid parking, I've been thinking about it for quite some time. As this came up way back in 2016 when we first started this, basically, and then the council reports that have come forward since then. Paid for parking certainly is not something that's new. You go to any hospital, or like you said, you go to any provincial area, it's there now. Everybody's accustomed to it. So I think you've clearly identified that we're not doing this to make any kind of money out of it. It's a strictly cost recovery. I think we're way ahead of the cart here on this when it comes to parking costs, because my last report to council talked about roadside parking. But in that report, it talked about holding off a little bit until we figured out what we could do for a parking area, like a parking lot, if you will. There's a lot of factors that are coming into these projects. And I think that if we could spend a lot of time stirring the public up by talking about parking fees and how we come to what fee we're talking about. I mean, I think one of my reports talked about like a $7 fee for 10 years, basically, based on 300 spots, and there was a bit of a math to it. But I think until you decide which parking plan you're going with, and I'm only speaking to Big and Little Hawk because that's what I'm representing in this meeting, until we have the full numbers of the cost per the project, you've decided which one you would like to pursue, and then we can sit down and talk about what we're going to try and charge in relation to how many years we want to take to pay it back. How many people do we think we're going to be seeing park there? There's a lot of factors in it, and I do appreciate the thought process because it does help me, moving forward when we do our planning and further reports. I think we're just way too far ahead on that at the moment. I think it's good discussion. I think it helps us plan, but there's so many factors on what we could charge, how we charge, why we're charging it, and I think that would come back into. I know it would come back to council in a report once a decision has been made on what you would like, a parking lot, roadside parking, or both. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I'm sure everybody's thinking it. I just wanted to throw that out there and for the public too, because I've been seeing the emails and I've had numerous phone calls over the week and they start out rough, but they usually end up really, really well received afterwards when we explain that it's not a money grab, right? So I hope that helps. But I just wanted to share that.
It does, and it's obvious that the more we talk about this, the more complicated we see that it is. And I've had different thoughts about if we build a parking lot and someone is able to reserve a spot in that parking lot, then to me, it's natural that there should be some fee attached to that. Should we be charging for parking on the roadside? I guess a permitting system, coming in and getting a permit and being able to, deal with it that way might make it easier. I sort of looked at as well on the other side, if we do road improvements, all of our road improvements are attached to the general levy. And I sort of thought, well, I guess if we're going to widen or improve Little Hawk Lake Road, Big Hawk Lake Road, that would, go into the general levy, but maybe there's another alternative to that. I mean, there's an awful lot of options for us to consider. But I'm still kind of stuck on if we build a parking lot and you're allowed to reserve a spot in that parking lot, you should have to pay for it. But there's a lot more discussion that needs to take place before we really land on that. I'll just go back to Adam and then to Councillor Barry.
Thank you, Mayor, and I really appreciate your sentiment there because that was part of the conversation I had with a caller this past week. Was we talk about road improvements, and we do road improvements annually through our gravel resurfacing or our tar and chip program. And how does that differ from, say, this location? If this was a location where, and you're all familiar with it, so I'm going to speak to Big Hawk specifically, the rock cut that's up there. If that wasn't there, and we had a farmer's field there, and we had our own room, we could widen the road and create off-site or off-road parking within our current budget, and that wouldn't really have been a major issue. Same with our parking lot up there. The property that the municipality owns, if it was nice and flat, we could easily create a parking lot, strip the material within reason. Maybe we do look at a parking fee of a couple dollars just to help offset that, maybe not. But we don't have that option there. And staff has certainly taken into consideration how we can build that parking lot as easy as possible without a lot of impact. But there is that line where we have to draw and say, we either throw some dirt down and hope for the best, or we build it properly and it lasts a very long time because we're going to invest a lot of time, money into that project. And I think that's extremely important to understand. And I did share that with some of the callers that I spoke to this week who were graciously enough to understand that process. If we can build it cheaply in the sense of not a lot of cost impact to our taxpayer, we certainly will try to. But again, longevity, we want to build something that's going to last a very long time so that we don't have to pour maintenance into it. We don't have to, keep going back to it. And I think that's important to understand as well.
Thank you. Councillor Barry.
Would like to see some sort of metrics of the number of parking spaces, and I'm sure this has come through, but I love all these tables, but like of how many parking spots we actually have to how many ratepayers are accessing those spots, and maybe an idea of how many short-term rentals we have on those lakes and how many parking spots would be indicated for those. So and then maybe, I don't know how you would ever measure it, but some sort of metric for how much tourism is coming there, whether that be the water trails or whether that be camping, just so you have an idea of who's using it. And I'm sure there are some people that would pay pay for a spot if it meant that they were, 100 yards closer to accessing where they need to go versus you get there at the end of the day and you've got the last spot, quite almost up by the log chute.
Well, and I think too that we need to deal with, it's just my thinking that we should be dealing with short-term rentals a little bit differently than we're dealing with parking for residents or water access only properties. I mean, short-term rentals are quite often charged out at a considerable fee. And I think that they have, a greater responsibility with respect to providing parking. One of the intricacies of our discussions going forward. Any other comments at this point? Councillor Richards?
I would say that, there are people who are absolutely willing to pay for a reserved spot closer to the lake. However, I think it is a small percentage. And so building a parking lot for that small percentage when you have free parking available, that the majority won't use it, and then we'll have an empty parking lot. Which defeats kind of the entire purpose. So it's a tricky road to go down, to consider that let's build the parking lot and everybody's going to pay for it.
No pun intended about the
Right.
tricky road.
And my concern is, well, then if you make all parking paid for, well, then you've got to shift into crown land or private land, that people will absolutely do. And so that's a concern too. However, on the other hand, I think we as a municipality, have a responsibility to consider not just our current needs, but our future growth. And we all have seen the congestion. We've all seen the issues. We know that there is a cry for something to be done. So I'm looking forward to hearing these great solutions come forward.
Well, in the future, I mean, we can see the impact of growth. When we've all talked about the fact that, years ago, the family all jumped into the family car. They brought their tinny with them. Now we're looking at, families bringing 2 or 3 cars, maybe more than one boat or trailer. The use or the demand has become, so much greater. I'm just going to go back to Adam because I see he's got some thoughts on Councillor Richards' comments.
Thank you again. Yeah, one of the thoughts that just came up there that I've been working on as well, and I wanted to just to clarify again, going back to Big Hawk Lake, is build a parking lot and then they won't use it because there is the free parking, and I think that comes down to our enforcement is that it's free parking, sure, right now, but they're parking on the road. And that was something that came up in some of the emails and the phone calls was, well, what triggered this? What incident happened that triggered this? And it wasn't one thing. It's been a decade or better of ongoing issues with parking. So I think that's one of the biggest keys that I think council is aware of, and the public needs to be aware of as well, is that if these parking lots do get built or these areas do get built, we do have to enforce them because we can't expect users to pay for them and then staff to just take a back seat and not enforce them. And I can also explain too, like we have issues with roadside parking for fishermen that come up, and the people I've talked to in the 16 years I've been here doing this is that they come from everywhere to go fishing. They park on North Shore Road, they park on different areas in our municipality. It usually only takes us one time to tow a vehicle and it pretty much stops it for the entire winter. Maybe we have to do it twice. I know that's not ideal, and certainly we take our earful when we do tow them, but that's the fact of the matter. And if anybody takes a look around, and I'm sure these gentlemen here can elaborate, is it usually only takes one tow and that stops it. I worked in Toronto this past summer and we had to buy a permit just to park on the side of the road for a couple hours, and it costs us quite a bit. So, I mean, it's not uncommon for these kinds of things. And I think that the enforcement is equally important when we're making these decisions to ensure that we have that available to us. The safety concern at Big Hawk, from my perspective, and I think council's perspective, is blocking the road. Cars are parking on the road and it is illegal to do that, especially during snow removal season. We have accommodated it, we have allowed it, but now we need to address it because it is getting out of hand. And although it's maybe 10 vehicles on a day, it only takes one to cause a problem. So I think we're being proactive with this, taking this approach, and I think the public needs to, understand that it wasn't just one issue. Going back to my earlier comment, when we talk about landings, and Chris can probably speak to this as well, it's a lot different when we look at paid for parking, I believe, on a landing versus Big and Little Hawk Lake Road. Because if we're looking at clearing municipal land or even M&RF land that's already flat, we just have to cut trees down, remove stumps and put gravel down. You might not see a pay for parking on a landing because of the cost is so low to the municipality and the user versus roadside parking. So when we say if we do it for one landing, we have to do it for all the landings. I think we just need to keep that in mind that some of those landings may be a simple couple of days worth of work. Some may be a couple of weeks. It really depends on the topography of the area. Chris can speak to that on his turn, but I wanted to throw that out there for those listening and just to help with the discussion.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that because I was going to switch back over to, the issues that Chris is dealing with. And we may not necessarily need to build a parking lot per se at every landing. Maybe we're just looking at, ensuring that we have land attached to the landing that we control and there's sufficient land for loading and offloading boats with, a little bit of parking, for short term. Or, there may be other landings where we really do need to build a parking lot and it's trying to determine exactly, where those needs are. I'd just let Chris comment and we'll come back to you if you, go ahead, Chris.
Thank you, Mayor. And something I was interested to hear discussed by Stuart was the concept of behavior management. And I was going to say this when I had my hand up earlier, and the conversations kind of come full circle back to it. And it speaks to the idea of whether or not paid parking would be needed at all landings. And I don't think it would be. And it also reflects what we've heard from some people who have taken the time to give us feedback in the community surveys that we put out as we're developing projects. An example would be at Fletcher Lake Landing, which we recently had our questionnaire for, where they said, when we asked them the question, do you need more parking? Their answer wasn't that we don't, actually their answer was we don't need more parking. We need people to understand where they can and can't park. So it's behavior management that's the issue there, not capacity management. And I wonder how many of those opportunities exist and whether or not there may be those types of opportunities even at the Hawks, I don't know. I'm a user of boat launches at some of these municipalities that have been mentioned. And because we're on the topic of Northern Bruce Peninsula and Tobermory, I know that's one that we identified at the outset as somewhere that could be comparable. And the reason it's comparable is because they went from a small town area that then saw a huge boom in tourism. They basically were so successful at marketing themselves that so many tourists came that, and not only do you see that you have to pay for parking, but you often also have to choose a time similar to what we do at the Dorset Tower in the fall. You're saying I'm parking from 3 until 5 and make that decision ahead of time. But at some of their kind of municipal access spots, I was at one of their boat launches at Lions Head this year, and this speaks to behavior management, as it says, trailers park here. There's signage that says trailer parking, vehicle parking, and then signage that says no trailers here. How many of those opportunities exist is worth looking at everywhere.
Absolutely, good point. Deputy Mayor Dayu, then Councillor Richards.
Yeah, thanks. I'm just commenting on points made by you, Madam Mayor, and Councillor Richards about the diversity of opinion on paid parking in a lot close to the landing reserved in advance, which would require, or would, logically necessitate a fee. I would hesitate to get stuck too soon into what happens and who goes into lots. I think these are models that we can really consider. There is an inverted model as well of a lot which is further away from, and we've seen options like this presented by staff, further away, that is used for people for their third and fourth car and their trailers, and it is required so that the primary residents, if they're only in one car or one car and one guest, they get the preferred free spot closest to the landing, and everybody else is paid and is further away. So for me, when we talk about paid lots, it isn't obvious who goes in it and on what basis. And I just wanted to point that out because I have also heard and read this worry that, hey, I don't want to pay more to, to get close to my cottage. I think there is an inverted way of doing it, and I bet our consultants have even more models to, to tell us about how those lots are used.
Thank you. Councillor Richards?
Yeah, it's just, I'm still not really hearing about how we deal with land that is not ours. Like we saw from the survey from Wagamama of boats being stored on land that we're maybe not even sure if it's municipal or crowned. And people parking in those areas as well, or camping in those areas as well. We have a hard time already dealing with that. And so in developing a solution that is going to enforce people on land that's ours, that's great. But what about land that's not ours? We've recently heard about issues on private roads of people parking on them to access Maple Lake. And we can't do anything. So how do we do anything?
You can't do anything on some roads.
So it's great. We could, okay, so then we make it all paid and we enforce people to pay to park, but then we create a whole other slew of problems onto people's private land or private roads or into the forest that we can't control. And I understand the cost recovery process is a huge amount of money. But I think it's going to affect all taxpayers on the levy anyway, by not being able to charge enough for cost recovery, and then also creating headaches for them.
Complex issue. Deputy Mayor Dayu.
Yeah, noted, 100%. I just don't think we're there yet in the conversation. I think that's the sort of thing that we need to continue to bring back as we go through, but we're just not at a place where we have answers. That's just what we got to look at.
Well, and part of the process will be that we need to, at each landing area, we may have to acquire Crown land or lease Crown land. We don't know what that cost is going to be yet. And we just simply are not going to be able to control or manage, issues that are out of our jurisdiction. And, that's, I think, where maybe part of the communications and feedback, will come into play. But, there are going to be certain things that we cannot manage. In the last couple of weeks, we've had some concerns raised about issues on private roads that we really can't look after. It's unfortunate that those residents are having challenges, but, it's their road to manage, or their road associations. Just this becomes more and more complex as we move along. Any other comment at this point, or we go back to our consultants and hear what you think about what you've heard from council, or continue on with your presentation?
Oh, it's been a great discussion. It's yeah, and there's some really curly questions in there. I think maybe there's some discussions we can have with town staff on some of the ideas that Chris and Adam had voiced. I was a little reluctant to go forth with conjecture. There's a couple of things I don't know, but looking into the issues of whether or not enforcement could take place on ministry lands, for instance. If there's some way there's an agreement or an ability to delegate authority down to the municipality to enforce on ministry land. I don't know, Adam, whether that's something that's been discussed already or could be considered.
Another issue. That's another issue entirely. And it goes beyond parking. I mean, we've heard some real concerns about, people camping on Crown land and the challenges that creates to residents who are living nearby. I mean, we presently cannot, and I don't see us moving forward to try and control everything that goes on Crown land. We've talked about acquiring parcels of Crown land where we would control or do law enforcement there, but that's trying to control all the activities that are inappropriate on Crown land within our township is huge for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of Crown land out there. So yes, it's definitely a curly question. I don't know if there's some out of the box solutions, but I mean, it sounds like you've been through it to a large extent anyway with the camping and those things that I don't know how or if the municipality wants to or can get involved in those things. Short of what you said is purchasing pieces of land that I don't know if that's the solution either, but yeah, perhaps there's some discussions we can have with the township staff on that aspect and whether there's anything else we can think about in terms of best practices. I'm not sure.
I see Chris has got a comment you'd like to make. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. The way I think of purchasing Crown land would be relative to meeting demand. So that would be, again, identifying what the demand is first and then trying to meet that demand. And if it requires purchasing Crown land, that's what would happen. In areas where we anticipate that it's likely that our enforcement's going to push the issue onto Crown land, I think out of fairness, having communication with the province about that as well up front should be part of the process.
Maybe we shouldn't be using the term purchasing Crown land. Let's use the word acquiring. Because there are different ways for us to do that, and we haven't landed on that yet.
Correct.
Any other comments from council at this point? Okay, let's move on. Sorry, did you have your hand up? Go ahead, Stuart.
Thank you. Just to circle way back and tie on to the permit idea too is one of the things that might be useful in the future in this kind of conversation is, and it gets to how much the question of way back to the question of how much should be charged for fees, or if there should be fees or permits for boat launch parking as one example. Then at least, even if you don't charge for it, but you require people to have the permit, that's a really great way of knowing and tracking throughout the future what that demand might be. So then now you've got now there's 150 permits were applied for boat trailer parking in the municipality in 2027, and so on and so on. You can go forward and track that in the future. So that's sort of one thing we didn't touch on when we're talking about fees. That's one thing that the municipalities that are doing those permits would have at their disposal, would be some good information on how well those programs are used. So I just wanted to tie that knot back up. If we can, I guess the next one, and I got to limit myself because there's part of this that sort of spills over to the next slide as well. Starting with the bottom line, I guess, is that what the Township of Algonquin Highlands is doing is what everybody else is doing as far as those peer municipalities. So there's a vast majority that brought in a licensing of short-term rentals in sort of the 2023, 2024 ish time period. A lot of them have brought that in. and require a license. And most, if not all, of those license applications require the applicant to identify where parking is to be supplied. So to a large degree, that should be addressing the problem. There's different ways on the next slide when we talk about the planning policies of sort of how many spaces and how that's dealt with. But the simple point here is that the township is definitely in line with what the peer municipalities are doing in terms of requiring a license. Michael, do you have anything you wanted to add on this one? And then maybe we can just sort of segue into the next slide if once you've made a comment.
Yeah, with this one, not too much to add. I think just to reiterate what Stuart said, a lot of these bylaws came online around the same time, and you can tell they were influenced by each other. They all have a similar look and feel. Quite a few of them don't talk about parking explicitly. They refer to the relevant zoning bylaw, and the zoning bylaw was often updated to include a parking requirement for short-term rentals. So the connection with the short-term rental licensing and parking was often done that way. Sometimes it's, and I think this is the case for Algonquin Highlands. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but usually a site plan that shows where the parking spaces are going to be on the site, which is private land, of course, unless it's water access, is a requirement to get the license. So that's something that the municipality seems to already be doing, which is common in other places.
I'll just go to a comment from Deputy Mayor Dayu.
Thanks. Yeah, just a nuance to consider with regards to our short-term rental bylaw. Is that we, in our bylaw, insist that only primary dwellings can be used for short-term rentals. So if you have a bunkie, you can't be in your primary residence and then rent out your bunkie on the side, which means that there's, in one sense, a like-for-like replacement of parking. If someone is renting out their private cottage for a weekend, they themselves are not going to be at the cottage for the weekend. So the parking that they have given up for themselves is being occupied by the short-term rental occupant. I think what the primary change could be, and I don't have any statistics to back this up, is that there could be cases of families who used to come up for 4 weekends in a summer or a couple of long weekends and 1 week at a time, and they were not coming up to their cottage at the other times, and other cottagers in other cottages were coming up on different times, and so it sort of all came out in the wash. Whereas now with short-term rentals, there is the possibility of each of those cottages being full every single day of the summer. So the scale of quantity is going up, but it isn't necessarily per cottage. It's just that all the cottages maybe are trying to use all of those spaces all at once. So it's a small detail, but I think it's an important nuance when we start getting into the nitty-gritty of it.
I'm not sure it is a small detail. Like it's, that's a big consideration in my mind. Any other comments at this point in time? Okay, Stuart, back to you, or Michael.
Yeah, Michael, I just, while you're on a roll, just hit the next slide as well, because I think this sort of dovetails into, well, there's a couple of things we're looking at here, but why don't we just touch on that, the short-term rental part of that too, as far as what the planning policies are. I think you've already talked about it a little bit.
Yeah, and the kind of the integration of short-term rental parking, the requirements for that in zoning bylaws. Another thing that I think we touched upon it briefly in December is Lake of Bays had just implemented a policy, but cash in lieu of parking, which is where a new development or an addition or something like that doesn't need to meet the zoning bylaw parking requirement if they provide cash to the municipality, that the municipality would then create a fund towards building municipal parking. And you can see on the screen a lot of the municipalities that we studied have this mechanism in their zoning bylaw in some way, shape, or form. A lot of the ones that have it, though, are some of the larger municipalities that we looked at, as opposed to the smaller municipalities. So that was one little nuance you can see in the list there, but that was probably a key finding. And then just looking quickly at water access only properties. So Dysart Isle and Hastings Highlands would have water access only requirements. And so would Lake of Bays and Minden Hills. I don't know if you have anything else to add to that, Stuart.
Yeah, I think just on that water access only property parking, there was sort of a division there, though. So there's some like Township of Algonquin Highlands, where if there's development on a water access property, they do. So I think that's a great idea. I'm glad you're doing it. You do have to demonstrate where the parking and docking is on the mainland. So some of them had that you had to demonstrate where it is on a property, but weren't specific about docking and parking facilities on a mainland. So I think that hearing what a lot of your issues are, I think that's a key thing, and I believe you're already doing that. And I guess there was some clarification at the beginning about whether or not that parking could be in a municipal supply. So I guess in your case, the answer was yes. So there's that little nuance in there too. Yeah, I think those are the key ones we want to look at. One, so cash in lieu of parking, and there's some discussion on earlier on sort of collection of fees or funding versus the cost of actually doing something. And it depends on what that something is. So just as far as costs go, like if you actually own the land and wanted to build a parking lot, just to, again, it depends how you do it, whether you just have, dirt road and clear, put a little bit of gravel down, that's not so bad. But if you go full hog and do asphalt or something like that and have a actual paved parking, it's going to cost something in the realm of $10,000 to $15,000 as per parking space just to construct it. Again, not dealing with the cost of the land itself. So it can take, what I'm trying to say is it can take quite a lot of development activity contributing to a cash in lieu fund in order for a municipality to actually do something with it, depending on what it is that you're doing. So that's just something to think about too when the conversation about cash in lieu of parking comes up. And that close example that Michael mentioned already is within the town of Dorset, within the Lake of Bays. And my assumption there is there's probably going to be higher costs, just given that it's a little more, how do I say, a little more urban / touristy with the restaurants and the cafes and the docks and everything else. It's probably likely to be a higher cost in terms of providing municipal parking in that area versus just clearing a section of trees and letting people park on it at a boat launch. So there may be some advantages in terms of being less developed, less built up, and some of the spending that could be done on that type of more remote boat launch activity.
I'm glad you've touched on the cash in lieu topic, because I wasn't quite sure how that worked, and so it's good to hear your explanation on that. So if we could move along.
Yep.
Or does council want to take a brief break at this point in time? If you gentlemen don't mind, I think we might take a 15-minute break before we carry on.
Of course, in your hands, of course.
Okay, so we will adjourn until 10:45.
Thank you.
Welcome back to our parking philosophy discussion. And back over to you, gentlemen.
All right, if we can get, thank you, Mayor, if we can get slide 19 on the screen. Enforcement and snow.
Big topic. Hmm.
All right, thank you. So I'll take this slide. So one thing we noticed, very common, in fact, in all the municipalities that we studied, is the second bullet point, and that includes Algonquin Highlands, that there's parking restrictions during the winter months. So they vary depending on the place, whether it starts in October or starts in November through to April, and I think most of them are April. That's something that Algonquin Highlands has within its parking bylaw. In other municipalities, and we didn't see this in the Algonquin Highlands materials online, the overnight parking restriction in municipal lots and roadside extends throughout the year in some other places. And I don't know, we should probably confirm with staff if that's the case in Algonquin Islands, but it seemed to be something that's absent. Some places, like as an example, in Innisfil, one of their municipal parking lots is maintained and made available year-round to residents. That's not something that was common. That's something we only saw in Innisfil. But generally speaking, in most places, the implication, the really strong tie between enforcement and snow is in the winter months, basically, is that enforcement was everywhere in the winter months, but not quite everywhere throughout the year. Some places it's a kind of a stern warning that's permanently on the website that says we may tow your vehicle if you're parked on the side of the road. But generally speaking, there wasn't much variation here. It seemed every municipality had some type of winter parking restriction. But again, as we discussed, the places with how much enforcement and how much they're doing, it probably require conversations with enforcement staff in other places. But these are the rules. This slide is based on the rules that are applicable in the municipalities that we looked at.
Well, I can see from your comments and from comments that Chris made earlier that signage plays a large part in this. Like I really appreciated the like no trailers here, and you know that's the sort of thing that can help to resolve some of the issues.
For sure.
Anyway, carry on.
Any comments on enforcement and winter enforcement from council or staff?
Well, obviously, I mean, winter enforcement is key because the ability to plow roads or plow parking lots is something that would be factored in. It just seems like almost every aspect of our discussions has enforcement implications, and that's a huge topic, and huge cost implications for us. So that's, I mean, we're going to have some pretty serious discussions with respect to that.
Yeah, and if you're going to move towards a permit system, even if it's a free permit system, even as a way to just kind of gain data, which is I think what Stuart highlighted just before the break, enforcement is quite frankly, those programs aren't of much use if the enforcement isn't steady and constant and frankly significant. So yeah, we would agree with that.
Not to put you on the spot, but are there any comments or thoughts that you've got at this point in time about any of this? But I'm thinking more about enforcement and the impact on enforcement that you might have.
Not in any great detail at this point, depending on what council decides to move forward with, for sure. I would have more comment on enforcement. But I think no matter what we decide, there will be an impact.
enforcement implications. Deputy Mayor Dayu?
Question for our consultants. In your review of current practices, were there any stellar examples of enforcement being farmed out to or outsourced to a different group that could be of value to us?
Stuart, I don't know if you saw anything quite like that, or if it could be something that's not advertised, certainly. But I didn't see anything contractual related or reported publicly, but that's something maybe we can look further into. I don't know if you saw anything like that, Stuart.
Yeah, I was gonna give the same answer you just gave, Michael. Yeah, I mean, within the scope of what we looked at, I don't. That's not something we identified. Yes, it does happen in some municipalities where it is contracted out to either a security firm or that type of thing, or the commissionaires do a bunch of that sort of stuff. The retired police people that do that for some municipalities. Yeah, it's an option. Whether or not it's cost effective is, I guess, something to be determined.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think at the appropriate stage, it would be interesting to drill down a little bit into how others do it, because I also imagine there are smaller municipalities such as ours that have a randomized enforcement rather than a steady daily enforcement. So you never know, it could be on this weekend or it could be on the other weekend. It's just like when the OPP come and patrol the lakes. You never know when they're going to show up, and it might only be once a summer on a particular lake, but you don't want to be caught out without your license on the day they're on your lake. So at the right time, I bet there are different models we could look at there.
Well, and I don't think that we can rely too much on any kind of partnership with the OPP. They're pretty strict about that's by law enforcement's responsibility, not our responsibility. And they have limited resources already and at extraordinary cost to the municipality too, I might add.
Yeah, I was gonna add to that. City of Kawartha Lakes. Some of the enforcement appears to be done just based off of their online notice by their police service, which I don't know if if they have OPP or if they have their own police service, but if you don't have your own police service, it would be OPP, and I appreciate the costs associated with that.
Go ahead.
Thanks. Just to clarify, though, I wasn't suggesting we consider the OPP. It was more the model of a randomized approach to which the OPP provides an interesting example.
Yep, understood.
So carry on.
Okay, can get the next slide. So yeah, I don't know, Stuart, if you want to take it from here to move us to next steps recommendations.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, just wanted to spend a little bit of time now. So as we said at the outset, if we could, just hit the next slide. We're sort of roughly halfway through what we're doing. So we've identified some examples of best practices we'd gone through earlier in the discussion today. It kind of distilling of the issues and confirmation of the issues and priorities. Today, I guess we'd like to, for the next step, looking ahead, we have the presentation and report on the recommendations. But before we get there, just to round off today, wanted to get some discussion or some buy-ins on the best practice direction we wanted to go in. If there's additional things we want to look at in a bit more detail, and come back and include that detail in the final presentation and in the report. So I think there's a few things we've been taking notes on the way through. Potentially some discussions we can have with city enforcement to sort of answer that big question, which is a really good one, is are things working in the other municipalities that we've looked at as far as what those options are for parking permits and enforcement, and is there anything they would kind of do differently if they had to start again? Those are really good questions that we can drill into a bit more on some of those big issues. So we've got a bit of time to do that. We're coming back before council again on March the 5th with that report to be tabled at that meeting and a presentation of that report. So I guess for now, if there's anything, any additions to the best practice review that we've done, or any sort of closing comments on particular directions or nuances, and again, I know we've been taking those throughout, so I think we're in a good position to go forward. What I would suggest we do with staff, at least following this meeting, is come back and clarify the list of those things that we think need additional investigation and responses to bring back to March the 5th. I would suggest we do that with Chris and his team before we get our teeth into preparing the final report and presentation. But if there's anything else within the room today with the council and mayor and deputy mayor to give us direction on where to take those best practice reviews, that would be appreciated. But as I said, we'll follow up with the township staff following this meeting once we've digested what we
We've
think
heard
the
some of
directions
the
are.
questions that have been raised by council. We are interested in seeing how enforcement is working, in some of the, so a little bit of follow-up with respect to that. I would look to council to see if there are other specific things that you're looking for. But I also think we need to have a brief discussion about how we go about seeking input from the public. So Deputy Mayor Dayu.
Thanks very much. Certainly how we seek information from the public is key. And I think it's going to be one of our trickiest surveys, if that's what we do, to really get right so that we're getting the information from the data that we collect that we really need. For example, I wouldn't want to see an opportunity for people to say, yes, we want more parking, but we don't want to pay for it. That can't be one of the outcomes. And by that,
That's
I mean,
what we've heard so far.
but what I mean is, not in the levy and not in a paid lot and nothing else. Like, we've got to structure it in a way that it is understood that no matter what happens, there is a cost implication. So what the best balance is for folk is what we're after. But that's definitely, I think, number one on my list is what would that survey look like and what would it ask? Number two on my list, and Chris Card mentioned this at the beginning, and so did Lisa Berry. How do we go about creating the data that we need on demand and supply that can furnish the content of our decisions? And that's a really big question. My third is models of lot use, and we touched on this. Is it the model is that the lot is there for as the primary spot to be, or is it there for folks to use so that the primary spots remain free and close to landings for our taxpayers? So the lot use model, I'd be curious to know how many different kinds of models there are out there. And then just two general comments from me. One is very interesting to hear the best practices of other spots in Ontario that you've found. My takeaway is the best practices appear to be current practices. And among them, there isn't a best practice that really works for us. I think there is real scope for innovation here. Take the most appropriate pieces of what we've heard from other townships and build a new model for Algonquin Highlands. I feel quite confident that none of the ones that we've heard of, they may be the best that's out there right now, but I think we could innovate and do something slightly more in tune with who we are and what we've got. And then my final thought on the back of today's conversation is the general principle of our philosophy that I am feeling at the minute as my one vote of 5. And the principle that I'm feeling is one in which all of our taxpayers across the township would have the right to municipal parking, i.e. along our roads for free, and in preferential places, and that anything beyond a minimum understood amount of people or stuff across our township would have a different solution to it. So either you're paying to have your trailer along the side of the road, or you're paying to go into a lot, or whatever it might be. But if there's a pay to play, the principle for me is at the minute that the levy covers the basic needs of our taxpayers in the primary locations, and then the pay to play bit is for everything above and beyond those primary needs and those primary people. And I know that we might all have a different take on it, but for now, that's the philosophical direction that I'm leaning in.
I'm not sure I got a lot of clarity there about, preferential places and, it's something that we need to delve into a little bit further. And I'm not sure how that fits into the process that we've laid out with our consultants and, how much we can ask our consultants of that. But let's hear from other members of council, Councillor Richardson, Councillor Barry, and any comments later on from staff that you've.
Yeah, I really do believe that we do need some form of public consultation.
Mhm.
I'm concerned about uh, a survey and the trickiness of that survey, and that everybody's going to know it's going to cost something, whether it's on the levy, whether it's pay per user. I think it's generally known it's going to cost money to supply parking. So I worry that, that may shy people away from going, you know what, don't do anything because we don't want to pay anything. So just leave it. Just let the problem accrue for the next 10 years. And then we'll complain again that you didn't do anything about the parking in 10 years. So I worry about how we word that survey. And at the same time, I think we need to come a little bit further in what solutions are on the table, and what directions, maybe a few options. So we need to narrow it down a little bit more before we jump on that consultation. But I'm not sure the survey is the best way to go about it, because I think it could end up very skewed. We've already had issues with not hearing from everybody in the past on surveys because not everybody's on social media, or not everybody's tuned in and checked in. So it does make it very difficult to really get to the meat of what we need to hear. So I would like to hear more about how we go about this in the right way, in speaking with the public as well. Like I said, we have huge crown land issues here. So that's kind of my biggest thing is
Huge, I'm sorry, what kind of
crown
issues?
land issues
Oh.
throughout our entire township, everywhere from camping to misuse of the land or in our forests, and dumping, and it presents such a challenge to us on any given issue that including parking, I worry that our enforcement abilities will lead to bigger problems in areas that we don't have jurisdiction to control it. So that's probably one of my biggest concerns, but yet obviously I'm concerned about the financial impact. We're a small municipality, and we don't have it. And there is something to be said about, residents, taxpayers, concerns and rights when paying into property taxes versus a whole mass of tourists. I mean, it's not that we want to discourage tourists from coming here, but we don't have the money to support it necessarily. And it's causing infrastructure issues throughout our township, whether it's on waste, whether it's on our roads, or parking issues. So we need to have some kind of mechanism to balance that. And I'm not sure what the solution is there. Because like I said, we don't want to discourage them from coming either. But it seems to me like this really rolls into a much bigger ball when you take into account that, you know, that the tourism we're driving here is to support local businesses, but those local businesses are not really in Algonquin Highlands, they're within the entire county, more so in Dysart and Minden. And so, you know, we're trying to deal with an issue at the forefront that is really countywide and not just in our local municipality. So I am hoping to see more come out on the mat tax from the county, you know, hopefully soon, as to see what kind of funding we can get to go towards these. And then, of course, you know, I appreciate Chris's comments on talking with the province in the issues that we're having and seeing where that can go.
Well, those discussions are ongoing,
Yeah.
but you know, I think we have a lot of leeway with how we use our portion of the mat tax. I'm not sure. I mean, of course, the county's portion of the mat tax is geared towards tourism, but that is county-wide, and I'm not really sure how much we can rely on, you know, financial support from them. You know, I mean, because they're right now they're heavy into trying to determine, you know, how we're going to do service delivery and work on, you know, closer relationships with service delivery. It's just that'll just be another aspect of things. You know, I was sort of hoping that we could, uh, I do think that probably the best method of communication would be a survey, although it does need to be very carefully crafted and viewed by council, or council needs to take part in what's included in that survey. The timing of the survey is another question entirely, because, you know, it could be that maybe we should wait and see what recommendations we get out of this process before we have a survey, or you know, that's kind of my thinking. Otherwise, you're really not knowing, you know, exactly what to respond to. And in any other method, like, I mean, I don't see a town hall being any different than a survey. Certain people show up, there will be different perspectives. And, you know, I'd rather, you know, see things in writing. But we do need to be very, very careful about how that survey is developed and what we ask to, you know, to get a clear picture of what people want. You use the word permission. You know, I think that this council has been elected to make certain decisions. And I was interested, you know, found it interesting that you use the word whether they give us permission to move forward. But anyway, just another thought. I guess I'm looking for other thoughts about how we go about communications and whether survey is the best, or, you know, what other members of council think. Councillor Barry, and then Councillor Shortreed.
I do like the idea of a survey. You know, I went through every single email received about this, you know, over the last few weeks and beyond. And there was quite a bit of sentiment that we were doing this, you know, in the mid depth of winter, and that this wasn't a public process. And I kind of feel like, well, we have to have these discussions before budget, and budget happens in February. And what we're planning to do isn't just necessarily for this year, but it's for looking forward for
Long term.
long term. So I do think a survey, especially when, and the other comment was, you know, a lot of the people that are on water access, they're not even up here right now, so they couldn't be part of the conversation. So but I think having a digital survey, it actually expands to the users. And I also think it's important that we hear from the rest of the municipality, because you can hear on the other side of the argument that they don't want to pay for parking for
One specific area.
for one specific area. So I think, and again, I think having some sort of a metric of knowing at each boat launch and marina area, water access area, trying to have a bit of a grasp of like, okay, is it 70% of the people using this have property here, and 20 are short-term rental, and 10 are tourism, and how does that impact? And I also like the idea of what Chris was saying about just like looking at the safety congestion and having some signs of like, this is the area for boats or surfer trailers. This is the area for parking. This is people for day use. And then maybe having people that are staying at their place for a week at a time. Maybe it isn't at the front of the area to allow to have that, you know, attention to some tourism. And I think the big thing too is to having an area that can be specifically for trailers. I think they're taking up a larger percent of the problem. And I think that maybe we look into ways that I like the idea of discussing. I've never been a big fan of the meter system, but I do like the idea of having like a pass, like you have a parking pass that gives every taxpayer, you know, an amount to use their spot or whatever, and then anything beyond that is up for consideration.
This issue of, oh, you're talking about things in a cloak of darkness because we're not here. To me, we've gone beyond that. I mean, we're live streaming all of our meetings. We urge people to, check in with our news and notices. There's a way for everybody who wants to be kept informed to do that themselves. That I don't buy that argument anymore. You know, and if that's what they think, then it's short-sighted. Because, I mean, I have continually urged people, watch, all our meetings are live streamed. You can watch them when they're taking place. You can watch them at any time after that. I'm not sure how long we actually keep that they're actually available on YouTube. I don't know that there's any limit at this
No,
point.
ours stay on YouTube.
So, I mean, people are free to watch and hear, what our thoughts are and the direction that we're taking. I guess I would look to staff to hear thoughts on, I'm hearing a lot of we need more statistics. We need more information or detail and how we would go about that. Is it our expectation that that would be added to the, our consultant's contract? Is it something that staff can do? And what kind of workload that adds to staff? So, I guess I would look to maybe yourself, Angie, or Adam or Chris to give us some input on that. How far do we go with looking for the kind of information you're seeking? Chris?
Specific to that portion, I definitely think for me and for looking at opportunities for enhancement everywhere, and as the project manager and myself go through information that we receive as we're developing projects around landings, the number one question is always around what is the demand. So I certainly think gathering that data is important as a next step. It will then allow us to set what our targets are. So understanding that, okay, we now have the data to say we have a need for 100 parking spaces. I'm just talking hypothetically in X location, and we only have 40. And therefore, where do we want to reach in that target? Do we want to target 100, or are we providing 80%? And how do we set those targets? That will then filter down into an understanding and looking more comprehensively at this is how much Crown land we need to consider acquiring, or this is how much of an issue these behavior management situations are in these locations relative to that. So certainly gaining that data. I think that understanding that what we've committed to through this process is, and I'll read the sentence from from the agreement we have with them, that their final presentation will include applicable best practices and recommendations for next steps. And I think getting their expertise through that final report on how to best go about those next steps and gathering data and what the options are there. Here's, yes, you could do it with staff, but here's the challenges associated with that. I know that this company does provide those services. So at the same time, we could start a conversation after that about what kinds of costs are associated with another company gathering that information. The same is to be said for public consultation. do we want to look at having a consultant work with us on developing public consultation processes? I know when we talked about the potential of a parking master plan with BA Group, they did mention that as a possibility and something that they recommend if you're going down the route of a parking master plan. But to temper that, the final report is likely going to have an opportunity to give us a number of next steps to then drill down on, and starting with the data, I think, is the spot to start.
And how far we want to go with that.
Yeah.
I want to continue to hear from any other thoughts that we get from staff, and then we'll come back to you. Adam, thoughts, and or Angie or Brian?
Thank you. I guess the only thought I have towards this as I've been listening to this and for the next steps would be, I think the idea of the trailer parking is a great idea. I think that maybe part of the survey could include, you know, if paid parking is a thing, or if we're going to build parking lots, would you leave your trailer? Right now there's, you know, a handful of trailers that get parked there, but would people be more inclined to bring their trailer here versus hauling it to another storage location that they may or may not pay for? So I think that would be a good question to ask, to see if they would leave their trailers here. And then the second part to that I was thinking about for this consultant group is the paid parking. I'm gonna go back to it just for a second and just talk about what are the best options for paid parking. Is it a QR code? Is it a booth? Is it a you know, something like you would see at a hospital where you drive in and it just collects your, you know, your ticket and you pay when you leave? So is there a best practice that's worked, you know, for these other parking areas that they say, oh, we just swear by this device, there's no maintenance to it, it's low cost? I think that would be beneficial to us as well, because if we are going to have the conversation about paid parking, whether it's roadside or parking lots, it would be nice to know in advance what some of the best options are that are currently being used, that you know are true and tested. So I think that would be an option as well. Those are the two items that I had thought of.
Angie?
I completely agree with Chris and Adam, and I think that where we're at now is fulfilling what council initially wanted as far as philosophy. I think what we're hearing is that you're looking for more. We need to, from that philosophy, we need to drill down on the recommendations, which to me is a phase 2. And we can work, you know, talk to the consultants to see what that would look like, as Chris outlined.
Okay. Deputy Mayor Dayu?
Thanks for all of that. Just to Councillor Richard's point about whether the survey is, you know, the best route for engagement, I do think that it is essential, because it is only through a survey that we will get disaggregated data. So important. You know, when someone writes and says, yeah, I use this landing all the time, and let me tell you, it's not a bigger problem as you might think. I don't know if that person is a water access only person, or if they actually have their own parking and they're only going by what they see, but not what they experience. Without the disaggregated data, we don't have much. So for me, 100% survey the whole way, with quite a bit of user input info, demographics, who they are and what location and what services they use, etc. Hands down for me, that's important. Also very much agree with Angie. This is a philosophical, you know, we are doing what we asked for precisely. I think this is exactly where we said we wanted to be. And I think a second step was always inevitable. And here we are, we're outlining what we want to put in the second step. What I would like to see, though, perhaps for the March 5th meeting, is there a consistent understanding of our philosophy? You know, that's what we've asked for. So have the consultants got enough? Or is there any further question they even want to pose today about what is our philosophy? And I think that will help guide what phase 2 options look like.
Councillor Berry?
And somewhere within the survey, I would like it to capture the entire municipality because
Absolutely must.
there's definitely been arguments of people that aren't on water that are like, I don't want to pay for a parking lot for people on water. So I think that that should be, but that being said, there's lots of people in the municipality that want access to the water. So having that as part of the question, I think is, and how much where's the threshold of where they're willing to put money in to rent or have a place. That's the other thing is if you live on a rural lot, are you able to purchase a space for your trailer for the summer, like or for the weekend, sorry, not for the summer, for the weekend or for your day trip, like where is that threshold of how long can you actually have a trailer there? There's some arguments that it should only be to drop off your boat and then it goes away. So that's the other consideration as well.
Definitely the philosophy needs to be township-wide. I mean, and looking at both aspects, I mean, the input that we've gotten so far has all been for the Hawks and Halls Lake, and we need to go much beyond that because there is definitely a different school of thought from, say, people who are living on rural properties, they don't live anywhere near water. They're not interested in paying, for somebody's personal parking spot somewhere. So, and I think that there needs to be some collaboration between the consultants and ourselves and our staff when landing on, the best survey. Is it better for our consultants to develop a survey and work with that process, or should it be a sort of a combined effort? Go ahead.
Be nice to have that survey complete before the end of this consultation with the consultants.
But do we first need to hear what recommendations come back on March 5th and then do the survey? Like, the timing I think is, we probably need to be a little bit closer to hearing what the recommendations are, and then we can tailor the survey to be most appropriate. Councillor Richards?
Yeah, I certainly know that there are a lot of comments out in the public about, I don't want to pay for a parking lot for water access properties. Well, water access properties don't want to pay for a Braylock Road to be plowed. We're all in this together as one township. We all pay property taxes and
At different levels.
at different levels perhaps, but the differentiation is not significant. And I think that we all deserve to not be discriminated against depending on the type of property that you own. We all have access to the lakes. We all have responsibility to take care for the lakes environmentally as well as, utilize them. So even if you don't live on a lake, you have a fishing boat and you come to the lake to use it, you're parking there, you're parking your trailer there and you're enjoying the lake just as much as a water access only property gets to do so. So I would like to say that I think it's an unfair comment to make that water access properties deserve less than any other constituent in our township.
I don't think anybody's actually said that.
The implication is there. That's all I'm saying. I didn't say from council. As far as the survey goes, I do think we need to get closer to the philosophy before we go down that road. So I'm looking forward to seeing what comes back at the next meeting.
Any other comments from council? Any other comments from staff? Well, I mean, obviously there's going to be discussions between yourselves, gentlemen, and our staff. And you've heard a lot of discussion and thoughts here today. I think what I am hearing is that we'll wait until your next meeting and kind of go from there with respect to consultation. It may mean that there's some extension to the work that we do with you. I guess it sounds to me like we need to wait until March the 5th and sort of decide where we're going to go from there, unless I hear anything different from anyone. Deputy Mayor Dayu?
I just want to drill down one more time on the idea of philosophy. And I do wonder if one option for the March 5th meeting is if, you know, if our consultants, after having listened to all of this again and spoken to staff, if they came back with 3 model phrases. Algonquin Highlands believes in this as a general philosophy for parking, A, B, and C, and we can, you know, we don't want to nickel and dime them, but basically land on what is our general ethos moving forward. That might be a valuable component to March 5th, so that we all at least know that we're facing in the same direction and we're not wandering from one philosophy to another as we consider our options moving forward and as we put our survey together.
I think we need to hear what the recommendations are and, you know, what we hear on March the 5th. And then we're going to have to, you know, basically say land in one place on how we're going to go forward. Like, I mean, we're just definitely going to have to reach an agreement with respect to that. What is our philosophy? Because we're hearing different thoughts here about, well, I don't agree with this or I don't agree with that. So we're looking for your help, gentlemen, in helping us land in a direction going forward. I think we may in some ways have gotten a little bit ahead of ourselves, or we've heard more than we expected. Like it's a complicated issue and costly one at that. Because that's you know, the bottom line is how we can go for how we can afford to go forward with some of these things. But at any rate, you know, hearing no more comments from council, are there any additional thoughts or questions that you gentlemen have got? Do you feel like you have enough information to go forward?
Yeah, I think we do have enough information to go forward, and like I mentioned before, I think I would like to, or we should, reconnect back with township staff after we've digested this meeting today, just again confirm what we're going to focus on and what we're going to come back and report on March 5th. I think just not to raise anything new, I just will agree with the mayor's statements on you know, the level of detail we're looking at now, and then the questions that have come up, I think, are answered by going, or potentially answered by going into a bit more detail on a few things that would be like a phase 2 to this study in terms of public survey or public consultation, and additional details on parking supply, demand, those kind of things. Again, those are usually done by surveys or some kind of way of gaining that information. So just adding a little more detail, I would expect to be required as you move forward in this process. But I think we have enough to go forward with in terms of putting up a parking philosophy and that kind of high level approach, and can happily report back to you on March 5th after we've gotten back in touch with township staff.
I do apologize if in some aspects of our discussion, it's sort of, we want to go this way. You know, because there is a bit of that and that's going to be a challenge for you to work with. But in the meanwhile, I really do thank you both for the work that you've done so far on our behalf. And I look forward to our next discussion. So do we have a resolution to receive the report? Could I have a mover and a seconder to do that? Councillor Berry? Deputy Mayor Dayu?
Moved by Councillor Berry, seconded by Deputy Mayor Dayu. Be it resolved, the council receives a presentation regarding parking best practices from Stuart Anderson and Michael Giovanardo from BA Group for information.
All in favor? That's carried. Once again, thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
So the next item on our agenda is a closed session. So I guess at this point, I would ask for a mover and a seconder to move into closed. Councillor Shortreed, Deputy Mayor Dayu.
Moved by Councillor Short read, seconded by Deputy Mayor Dayou. Be it resolved, council adjourns its open session at 11:37 a.m. in order to proceed into closed session for the purpose of discussing personal matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees, in accordance with section 239(2)B of the Municipal Act 2001 as amended.
All in favor? That's carried. We'll come back to the open session for a brief period of time. Could I have a mover and a seconder to adopt the confirmatory bylaw?
Welcome.
Councillor Shortreed and Deputy Mayor Dayou.
Moved by Councillor Shortreed, seconded by Deputy Mayor Dayou. Be it resolved that bylaw 2026-14, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of council held during its special meeting, being received and read a first time, considered read a second and third time, and finally passed with a corporate seal affixed.
All in favor? That's carried. And could I have a mover and a seconder to adjourn? Councillor Barry, Councillor Richards.
Moved by Councillor Barry, seconded by Councillor Richards. Be it resolved, the special meeting is hereby adjourned at 12:55 p.m.
All in favor? That's carried.